can be sort of a destructive process though, because you can be losing data when you're doing this. For instance, if you were to set white balance as something like this and then save the file, all this would be white. This is completely blown out. There's no more data there. I mean, you wouldn't be able to pull this back to something recognizable. Raw files, however, let you get away with that and give you a little bit more flexibility. And I can show you guys a little bit about how that works and about why raw is particularly helpful in that regard. I wonder how much time I got. So, Photoshop does have tools to edit RAW files. I just happen to prefer the way Canon has their stuff set up. So I'm just going to demonstrate using their software. To my knowledge, I don't believe that the GIMP offers the ability to edit RAW files. I might be wrong about that. Or there might be third-party solutions out there or plugins that let the GIMP do it. I couldn't tell you really. I'm sorry? Fair enough. Oh, right, there you go. But one of the things that RAW will let you do, which is very nice, is because you end up with a file that contains all the data that the sensor got without any interpretation, it gives you the ability to change all kinds of things after the fact, non-destructively and with a lot more flexibility. For instance, you can change white balance. You can change white balance initially from when you're shooting the image originally and tell your camera, like, I'm shooting under these conditions, I'm shooting under sunlight, I'm shooting under tungsten lights, and your camera will just balance the image based on what it assumes white is going to be underneath those lighting conditions. But what a RAW file will let you do is just change it to whatever you want later. Like, for instance, this was shot in my hotel room like a few minutes ago. And so if we set this as daylight or shade, we get something that's pretty close to normal. And it's done so non-destructively. All the data is still there. It's just that the way white is being interpreted has been changed. Now, of course, you can do this. You can use this to change it to something something crazy, using like a Kelvin temperature, and obviously do whatever you want to manually, or change it to something very strange. Or for that matter, just kind of push stuff around and do whatever you want using the controls that it offers. But that's one of the reasons why RAW has a lot more flexibility than a pre-interpreted JPEG file. In addition to the fact that it's 12 bits and you get that much more dynamic range, you also have the ability to edit white balance and things like that non-destructively, which can be very helpful later. The problem with RAW files is that they need to be nobody can read them. I mean, except for something that's specifically designed to read the RAW file, because it's just raw data. It's not been interpreted. It's not anything that a web browser or a printer or anything like that is going to be able to understand. And so when you're dealing with RAW files, you're always going to have to end up converting it back to a JPEG. And so if we do that, I can show you what ends up happening, which is that it takes a little while for your computer to process the image, to convert it back into something usable like a JPEG. But usually it's usually worthwhile. And as soon as this changes, we can move on to something else. So it's pretty handy in that regard. Yes and no, because a TIFF is still going to be 8 bits, and a TIFF is still going to be interpreted by the camera. It's going to be better than a JPEG because you're not going to get compression artifacts, but it's not as good as a RAW file, frankly. And a lot of cameras, or at least a lot of cameras, well, I should say a lot of cameras today have the ability to output RAW files. If your camera's a few years older, it might not. If you're really concerned about the quality of the images that you're ending up with, as low a compression as your camera's capable of doing is better. But if you can do RAW and you're really concerned about flexibility after the fact, go with RAW if you can. Yeah, I mean, basically that. Every manufacturer has their own type and their own specification. It often changes from model to model. So, which is why, like Photoshop's RAW plugin changes every now and again. It updates quite frequently to take advantage of new file types and things like that. I believe Adobe recently tried to put out a specification to standardize RAW files, which is a really good idea, but it's too new to have caught on yet. That's something that I'm looking forward to in the future. But no, there's really no standard. It's just kind of whatever you get. It's just a file full of data, and there's not much else. So, we're going to talk a little bit about perspective correction and distortion correction, which is always fun because most lenses will distort images. So, let's see. For instance, something like this. This was taken with a fisheye lens, but this is not like a really egregious example of perspective distortion. On your handout, if you guys got one, you do have examples of types of distortion, and there's really only two different types: there's pincushion distortion and barrel distortion. Pincushion distortion is usually the result of telephoto lenses, usually at the long end of a telephoto lens, which even on like a compact digital camera, when you're zooming into something, you're probably going to see some amount of pincushion distortion. If you're backed out a lot, or if you have like a wide angle lens, you're usually going to see at least some amount of barrel distortion. It really upsets some people. Some people really don't like the way it looks. You can use it to artistic effect. I think it looks cool in some circumstances, but if you want to get rid of it, there are some really handy tools out there that let you do it, namely everybody's favorite PT lens. PT lens is derived from, that's not going to work, is derived from a software library that was put out for panorama tools, which was developed to be able to produce panoramas and like sort of QuickTime VR, like things from images and things like that. And so it's pretty handy, and it has some very powerful perspective correction algorithms in it. And as you can see, when I pulled up this image, it already told me what type of camera this was shot with. It told me what model it was shot with and what lens it was shot with. And the reason it knows is because it's able to read the EXIF data, which is one of the places it comes in. Windows XP actually, just to get back on EXIF, Windows XP actually has the ability to display some limited amount, or some of the headers from EXIF. So sometimes you can sort images based on what camera it was shot by and things like that. I think we're all looking forward to the day when operating systems are able to read more metadata, because everything should have more metadata in it. In any event, what this ends up doing is it figures out, based on EXIF, what it can expect in terms of the distortion of the image. Like this plugin, and there are some standalone versions of this, and actually there's a command line version of this that runs under Linux if you like manipulating your images without seeing them. I'm not one of those people though. It doesn't know necessarily based on the lines here. It doesn't know what is curved and what is straight. So it's just it's kind of doing this blindly, where it's just assuming based on the EXIF what kind of perspective it should be expecting, and then what it does is it wraps the image around a fourth degree polynomial, and you end up with, if everything works out, and after a few seconds, a corrected image, and what ends up being hopefully more rectilinear, more straight and perfectly straight. And so, as you can see, the difference can be pretty dramatic. And like I said, some people do like distortion for artistic purposes. If you don't like it, there are some handy ways to get rid of it. And actually, on your thing, there's some software listed on there that can handle perspective correction. So let's see. actually. So that was just the plugin that runs under Photoshop. There is a standalone version that runs under Windows. I can show you guys that because it's more or less the same thing, but it gives you a little bit more ability to play with the images and play with the way they're getting wrapped around. You can see that again. Let's see. Let's do this. And this is the hotel. If you guys didn't recognize it. And so what we can do here is you guys can see kind of how the image is getting pushed around, and there's sort of a balance between the way the way that the image is getting wrapped around. And if you can always do it manually if, for instance, the software doesn't have a preset for the type of camera or the type of lens you have, or for instance if you end up with an image that doesn't have EXIF or something like that. So you can always do it manually and play around with it, but it does give you an idea of how the image is getting pushed around, and it's kind of interesting in that regard if you're into that kind of thing. The standalone version is called Radcore. Where'd it go? And I'm sure you can find it through Google or anything like that. The plugin version, there's a GIMP plugin. It's called PT Lens. It's pretty handy. I do recommend it if you're interested in any kind of perspective correction. And let's see. I think I am kind of running out of time. Does anybody have any questions about anything? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Radcore and anything derived from PT Lens is free. It's all open source software. So that is free. The plugin that I was running is just a Photoshop implementation, but there are free versions out there. Yes. You can. It's interpolating pixels either way. Because it's making up data in certain places, particularly around the edges. Distortion will always be more obvious around the edges, and if there's no pixels there, it needs to make them up from somewhere. And so it's always going to interpolate from neighboring pixels. There's no way to get around that aside from shooting very high resolution and hoping for the best. Serial number. I think CS might. I don't know any. CS Photoshop CS is just Photoshop 8. CS2 actually just came out, which would be Photoshop 9, I guess. And it's got some really interesting perspective correction tools built into it. Adobe really seems to be moving their software towards digital photo manipulation as opposed to film manipulation, or I should say like digitized film manipulation. So they're making some strides in that direction. I couldn't tell you about anti-piracy measures though, at your own risk. Echo. Yes. My understanding, and this might be wrong, is that I think some consortium of banks or governments or something like that, they wrote a library that's able to like detect certain types of currency, namely like U.S. currency and euros and things like that, and got software and hardware manufacturers to implement that in their products. So actually, if you try to scan a dollar bill on like a modern scanner, it won't scan. I don't know. I don't know. I think it just stops. I don't know. What are you scanning a dollar bill for?